Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: BJ, Jamie, and Mary Jane. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and finding out more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes and brand new collections so you can find your favorite recordings by topic, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight, let's celebrate the 300th episode of this podcast with a few fireworks and relax with more from Pyrotechnics, The History and Art of Firework Making by A. St. H. Brock, ARIBA, with numerous colored and other illustrations. First published in 1922 by Daniel O'Connor, 90 Great Russell Street, WC1, London. Let's pick up right where we left off at Chapter 4. Let's begin. Chapter 4, Pyrotechny in Europe, continued. During the later part of the 17th century and subsequently, many prints appeared depicting firework displays. Their number seems quite out of proportion to the total number of prints published in that period. Possibly this may be taken as some indication of the popularity of firework displays at the time, or may give the measure of the favor in which they were held by the artists of the day. Many of these prints are of little value to the student of pyrotechny, as they merely depict the more or less elaborate structure for the display by daylight, and whatever may be their architectural or artistic merit, there is generally no indication of what actual fireworks were to be used or how they were to be displayed. In some cases, a list of the works is given under the engraving, adding greatly to its value in the eyes of the pyrotechnist. And some, although they are considerably in the minority, are intended to represent the display in progress, although on the rather futuristic method of showing everything going off at one time. A series of prints published in Germany during the 17th century are among the earliest in which a serious attempt is made to depict pyrotechnic effects. The series includes Swedish Fireworks, dated 1650, Fireworks at Nuremberg in celebration of peace of the same date, Fireworks given at Pleissenburg by the Prince of Saxony, 1666, and the same year, Fireworks at Vienna. All three prints show a good display of rockets, also bonfires, and there are indications of primitive wheels. The same remarks apply to a very fine plate published in 1669, depicting a display given at Stockholm in honor of the investiture of Charles XI of Sweden with the Order of the Garter by the British ambassador. This engraving carries with it a feeling of conviction that it is an actual representation of the scene, and not, as is the case with earlier and with some later work, that the artist is drawing on his imagination. In many of the earlier prints, it is difficult to judge if the artist is depicting what he imagined, or monsters and scenic effects actually constructed for the display. It is worthy of note that even in early times, speaking pyrotechnically, the value of water in enhancing the effect of fireworks seems to have been realized. The display at Stockholm we have already mentioned appears to have taken place on the seafront. Many of the larger French displays of the 17th and 18th centuries were fired with a foreground of water. In those at Versailles, full advantage was taken of the wonderful fountains and ornamental water, the display given in celebration of the entry of Louis XIV in Paris after his marriage being given on the Seine, and many of the early English displays took place on the Thames. Probably the earliest contemporary account of any length of a firework display in England is one headed, "The Manner of Fireworks Showed Up Upon the Thames," in celebration of the marriage of Prince Frederick, Elector Palatine, with the daughter of James I in 1613. We read, "Many artificial concussions in fireworks were upon the Thames performed. First, for a welcome to the beholders, a peal of ordnance like unto a terrible thunder rattled in the air. Secondly, followed a number more of the same fashion, spreading so strangely with sparkling blazes that the sky seemed to be filled with fire. After this, in a most curious manner, an artificial firework with great wonder was seen flying in the air, like unto a fiery dragon, against which another fiery vision appeared, flaming like to St. George on horseback, brought in by a burning enchanter, between which was then fought a most strange battle, continuing a quarter of an hour or more. The dragon, being vanquished, seemed to roar like thunder, and withal burst into pieces, and so vanished. But the champion with his flaming horse for a little time made a show of triumphant conquest, and so ceased. After this was heard another rattling sound of cannons, almost covering the air with fire and smoke, and forthwith appeared, out of a hill of earth made upon the water, a very strange fire, flaming upright like unto a blazing star, after which flew forth a number of rockets so high in the air that we could not choose but approve by all reasons that art hath exceeded nature, so artificially were they performed. And still as the chambers and culverines played upon the earth, the fireworks danced in the air to the great delight of His Highness and the princes. Out of the same mount or hill of earth flew another strange piece of artificial firework, which was in the likeness of a hunted hart, running upon the water so swiftly as it had been chanced by many huntsmen. After the same, issued out of the mount a number of hunting hounds made of fire, burning, pursuing the aforesaid hart up and down the waters, making many rebounds and turns with much strangeness, skipping in the air as it had been a usual hunting upon land. These were the noble delights of princes, and prompt were the wits of men to contrive such princely pleasures. where kings' commands be, art is stretched to the true depth, as the performance of these engineers have been approved. But now again to our wished sports. When this fiery hunting was extinguished, and that the elements were a little cleared from fire and smoke, there came sailing up, as it were upon the seas, certain ships and galleys bravely rigged with top and topgallant, with their flags and streamers waving like men of war, which represented a Christian name opposed against the Turks, where after they had a while hovered, preparing as it were to make an incursion into the Turkish country, they were discovered by her towers or castles of defense, strongly furnished to intercept all such invading purposes. So sending forth the reports of a cannon, they were bravely answered with the like from the galleys, banding fire and powder one from another, as if the god of battle had been there present. Here was the manner of a sea fight rightly performed, first by assailing one another, all striving for victory, and pursuing each other with fire and sword. The culverines merrily played betwixt them, and made the air resound with thundering echoes. And at last, to represent the joys of a victory, the castles were sacked, burned, and ruinated, and the defenders of the same forced to escape with great danger. The foregoing appears to be the only full account of a display in England during the early part of the 17th century. But in the first serious work on fireworks, Pyrotechnia by John Babington, gunner and student of the mathematics, we find a proposed program for a general piece of firework for land for the pleasure of a prince or some great person. The spectacle consists of 2 castles with mechanical effects, but includes such devices as horizontal and vertical wheels, flights of rockets, line rockets, and torches of beautiful fire. Babington also describes the St. George and Dragon device, which is merely scenic, the figures being of wickerwork and canvas with slight firework effects. At this time, according to a history of colleges in and around London, there were many men very skillful in the art of pyrotechny and fireworks. In a book on fireworks published in the same year by John Bate, the author concludes by saying, "I might have been infinite in the describing of such like, with ships, towers, castles, pyramids, but considering that it would but increase the price of the book, and not better your understanding, since all consist of the former works, which are so plainly described, as that the most ignorant may easily conceive thereof, and if any wit ingenious, thence contrive others of what fashion they list." From this it would appear that firework displays were by that date a well-established institution. Pepys, in his account of the coronation of Charles II, 1661, says, "We stayed upon the leads and below till it was late, expecting to see the fireworks, but they were not performed tonight." He seems to have looked upon fireworks as a matter of course on such an occasion. However, a display of considerable size did take place, conducted by Sir Martin Beckman, later Fire Master to James II, who was responsible for most of the important displays until 1706. One of the earliest prints of an English firework display is that depicting the fireworks on the Thames at Whitehall for the coronation of James II, 1685, in which the artist appears to have drawn somewhat on his imagination. 3 years later, an elaborate display was given on the Thames to celebrate the birth of an heir to the throne, who was afterwards known as the Old Pretender. In the same year, we again see fireworks on the Thames, this time to celebrate the reception of the Prince of Orange. In 1690, displays were given, again on the Thames and in Covent Garden, on the occasion of the King's return from Ireland. The taking of Namur, 1695, was celebrated by a display in St. James's Square. And on the same site 2 years later, the celebrations for the Peace of Ryswick. This latter is depicted in a fine engraving, giving the following list of fireworks used on the occasion. 1,000 sky rockets from 4 to 6 pounds weight, 200 shell, 2,400 pumps with stars, or Roman candles, 1,000 cones, 7,000 reports, 15,000 swarms, 400 light balls, 23 rocket chests, each containing 60 rockets from 1 to 4 pounders. John Evelyn in his diary says, "The evening concluded with illuminations and fireworks of great expense. The display cost £12,000. There seem to have been no fireworks in London at the coronation of either Anne or the first 2 Georges, although on the former occasion rockets appear to have been fired from the fleet at Spithead. The peace rejoicings of 1713 were the occasion of another display on the Thames off Whitehall, the erection being about 400 feet long, on barges chained together in the stream. A feature of this display was the water fireworks, described as follows: 1,500 small and large water rockets, 5 large water pyramids, 4 water fountains, 13 pumps, 21 standing rockets, with lights all swimming on the water, 84 of call bourgards, large and small bee swarms, half of which were set with lights to swim on the water." The next event to be celebrated by firework displays on a large scale was the Peace of Aix-la-Chapelle. These were given at Paris, The Hague, London, and St. Stephen's Green, Dublin. The Duke of Richmond was responsible for a display on the Thames off Whitehall, the official display taking place in Green Park, and was on a scale unequaled in this country until well into the last century. It was conducted by the famous pyrotechnist Gaetano Ruggieri, who came over from France for the purpose, assisted by Giuseppe Sarti, under the direction of the Board of Ordnance. Following the practice of the period, an elaborate structure was prepared. The following is taken from the official program: a description of the machine for the fireworks, etc. The machine is 114 feet high to the top of His Majesty's arms and is 410 feet long. It was invented and designed by the Chevalier Servandoni, and all the framing was performed by Mr. James Morris, master carpenter to the Office of Ordnance. The ornaments of this machine are all in relief, and it is adorned with frets, gilding, lustres, artificial flowers, inscriptions, statues, allegorical pictures, etc. According to a contemporary newspaper report, the construction occupied from November 7th until April 26th. It was composed of timber covered with canvas, whitewashed and sized. The display commenced about 6 o'clock and continued until after 12. During the display, the left wing caught fire, which prevented the firing of some of the devices. Indeed, according to Walpole, the Duke of Richmond's display on the Thames a few weeks later consisted largely of fireworks which had not been fired owing to this occurrence, and which the noble Duke had bought up cheap. Among the items were included the following: regulated pieces, fixed suns, stars of 6 points, and between each point a ray, a large vertical sun moved by double fires, cascades, pyramids 40 feet high of gerbes, etc. The chief piece seems to be one from whence fire issues out and retires within 12 times alternately. When without, it forms a glory. When within, it composes a star of 8 points, and then changes to a royal brilliant wheel, whose fire is 30 feet in diameter and is moved by 12 fires. The remainder of this century in England appears to be rather barren of firework displays on a large scale. A writer in the St. James Chronicle, under the date February 18, 1764, in a letter advocating certain improvements in St. James's Park, evidently recalling the outcry over the 1749 display, observes, "We had no fireworks at the Peace last year. That will surely obviate any argument preferred against the expense of the undertaking." Until nearly the end of the 18th century, according to Strutt, writing at that time, it was customary for the train of artillery to display a grand firework on Tower Hill on the King's birthday, but owing to the disturbances that occurred, the inhabitants a few years since petitioned against it. There was, however, a great increase in the number of displays. Fireworks became a feature of the program of the majority of the then fashionable tea and pleasure gardens. Walpole describes a firework display given in 1763 by the notorious Duchess of Kingston, who was 13 years later tried by her peers on a charge of bigamy. The display appears to have taken place in Hyde Park, opposite the residence of the Duchess, then at the height of her popularity. He records that the fireworks were fine and succeeded well. One item seems curious to modern ideas. It took the form of a cenotaph for the Princess Elizabeth, a sister of the king, bearing the inscription, "All honors the dead can receive." The sequel was even more extraordinary, as about 1 in the morning the sarcophagus burst into crackers and guns. Lieutenant Jones, who published a book on fireworks in 1765, in his preface makes the following remarks: "I own I cannot help reflecting with some kind of chagrin that whenever we have had occasion for these sorts of diversions to be exhibited in England, we have almost always had recourse to foreigners to execute them. If this has been owing to the ignorance of our own people on this subject, I shall be very happy if it is in my power to correct it. If it is only owing to that prevailing fondness we entertain for everything foreign, I know no remedy for that evil but time and experience." To a certain extent, his complaint seems justified. As we have seen, the Aix-la-Chapelle celebrations were conducted by foreigners, Ruggieri and Sarti. Later in the century, Morel-Torre, who, as previously mentioned, collaborated with Ruggieri in pyrotechnic displays for Louis XV, and several other pyrotechnists came to this country and conducted displays. At the same time, however, there were undoubtedly many capable pyrotechnicians of English nationality who found scope for their abilities in the exhibitions given in the pleasure gardens of London and the provinces in the 18th and early 19th centuries. A history of pyrotechny would not be complete without a survey of these popular places of amusement, and we propose in the following chapter to give a brief summary of the better-known places of resort. Chapter 5. The London Pleasure Gardens. During the 18th and first half of the 19th centuries, the pleasure gardens filled a position in the lives of a large proportion of the public, comparable with that of the cinema today. To the great mass of the public, the most general form of evening relaxation was a visit to one or other of these places of resort. Apart from meals of a more or less elaborate nature, and liquid refreshments of various kinds, a great variety of entertainments were provided, varying from displays of horsemanship to exhibitions of paintings. Of these diversions, none were more general than fireworks and illuminations. At many gardens, fireworks formed a regular feature of the program. At others, generally less ambitious undertakings, displays were confined to occasions such as the King's birthday. Space will hardly permit of more than a glance at those resorts situated in the provinces, but a description of those in the London area may be taken as typical. Captain Marryat in Peter Simple gives an account of a visit to Postdown Fair near Portsmouth and an adjournment to the local Ranelagh Gardens to see the fireworks. As the pyrotechnist was behind time, Peter Simple and his friends took it upon themselves to fire the display. In about half a minute, off they all went in the most beautiful confusion. There were silver stars and golden stars, blue lights and Catherine wheels, mines and bombs, Grecian fires and Roman candles, Chinese trees, rockets and illuminated mottos, all firing away, cracking, popping, and fizzing at the same time. It was unanimously agreed that it was a great improvement on the intended show. Undoubtedly the gardens best remembered at the present day are Vauxhall and Ranelagh, neither of which were early in the field in presenting firework displays to the public. The first displays took place at Vauxhall about 1798, more than half a century after their appearance at some of the less famous gardens, and did not become a permanent feature of the program until 1813. They continued regularly until the final closing of the gardens in 1859, the final item of the program being Farewell Forever in letters of fire. In 1813, an item in the firework program was the performance of Madame Saki, who was to slide down an inclined rope 350 feet long from the top of a mast 60 feet high, erected on the firework platform, enveloped in fireworks. So popular did this exhibition become that it was repeated here by other performers, by Longman in 1822 and later by Blackmore. The best-known pyrotechnists connected with Vauxhall were Southby, Mortram, and Hengler, the first display being by an Italian named Invetto. Pyrotechnic displays at Ranelagh became a prominent feature of the amusements about 1767. The pyrotechnist Angelo, father and son, during that and the following years, helped to establish these displays in popularity, followed by Clitheroe, Caillot, Brock, Rossi, and Tessier, up to the closing of the gardens in 1805, after which date they appear to have been opened from time to time on special occasions. The Morning Chronicle of June 1st, 1812, announces that by the authority of the Right Honorable the Lord Chamberlain, these gardens would be open in honor of His Majesty's birthday, with a grand naval and military fete, and a superb exhibition of fireworks. An interesting old advertisement dated 1766, for the benefit of the General Lying in Hospital, the most superb and magnificent fireworks ever exhibited at that place, under the conduct and direction of Mr. Angelo. It would appear from this that fireworks had been fired at Ranelagh earlier than 1766, but they could not have been a regular feature before 1767. Cooper's Gardens, which stood on the south side of the river, approximately on the site of the Waterloo Bridge approach, were for a long period the scene of popular firework displays. Commencing about 1741, these displays were as elaborate as any of this period. The earlier displays appear to have been conducted by the ingenious Mr. Werman, who seems to have relied to a considerable extent on transparencies and scenery. In 1749 and 1750, he reproduced in miniature the firework machine or temple used in the respective official displays in Green Park and at The Hague for the Aix-la-Chapelle peace celebrations. Other scenic effects were a view of the city of Rhodes with a model of the Colossus, Neptune, issuing from a grotto below drawn by seahorses, set fire to a pyramid or an Archimedean worm and returned. Clitheroe was also associated with these displays, producing similar scenic effects, including a naval engagement in 1755, which was the last year of fireworks in these gardens. The earlier displays at Marylebone Gardens took place about the middle of the 18th century. In 1751, a display is announced to take place at 11 o'clock, and a large collection of fireworks was advertised in 1753. Some at least of these earlier displays were fired by Brock, whose son later on worked here in conjunction with Torre. In 1769, the displays were under the direction of Rossi and Clanfield. From 1772 to 1774 was the most successful period of the fireworks at these gardens. They were then under the direction of Torre. A popular item, afterwards copied by Marinari at Ranelagh, was the Forge of Vulcan, a scenic display concluding with the eruption of Mount Etna. On the occasion of Torre's benefit in 1772, there was a further exhibition of this kind, representing Hercules delivering Theseus from hell. During this period, attempts were made by neighboring residents to stop the displays as a nuisance, but nothing came of it, and the fireworks continued. At the annual festival in 1772, the display included a temple of upwards of 10,000 cases of different fires, all lighted at the same time. Other pyrotechnists firing at the gardens were Clitheroe and Caillot, both of whom had conducted displays at Ranelagh, the latter being responsible for the fireworks up to the closing of the gardens about 1778. It is recorded that Dr. Johnson once visited the gardens on a firework night, but unfortunately a wet one, and notice was given to the handful of visitors that the fireworks were wet and the display would be cancelled. The doctor, however, was of opinion that it was a mere excuse to save their crackers for a more profitable company, and suggested that a threat to break the lamps would result in the show being forthcoming. Some young men standing by endeavored under his direction to ignite the pieces, but unsuccessfully. The Mulberry Gardens, Clerkenwell, were among the earliest to make fireworks a feature. Displays took place from the opening in 1742, and 10 years later, Clanfield gave a display each evening. 2 neighboring taverns, Lord Cobham's Head and the Sir John Oldcastle, had displays from 1744, and in 1751, new fireworks in the Chinese manner were announced at the latter establishment. The New Wells in the same neighborhood as the foregoing had had a display as early as 1740, but it appears to have been of a scenic nature, representing the siege of Portobello. The Star and Garter, Chelsea, advertised displays by Signor Genovini of Rome in 1762, and Jenny's Whim, in the same neighborhood, had displays somewhat earlier, the place having been established as a pleasure resort by a pyrotechnist. Cromwell Gardens, in the vicinity of the present Cromwell Road, had what appears to have been a small display in 1784. Rossi and Tessier, the pyrotechnists of Ranelagh, gave displays at the Bermondsey Spa Gardens in 1792. A representation of the Siege of Gibraltar was given, and on September 28th of that year, by special desire, the Battle of the Fiery Dragons, and the Line Comet to come from the Rock of Gibraltar and cause the dragons to engage. Brock also gave displays here later. Finch's Grotto Gardens, whose site is now occupied by the headquarters of the Metropolitan Fire Brigade in Southwark, had occasional displays of fireworks about 1770, as did the Temple of Flora in the Westminster Bridge Road about the same date. Clitheroe advertised a display of fireworks at Jamaica House, Rotherhithe, in 1762. A peace celebration display is announced for February 7th, 1749, to be played off this evening in the field adjoining to the tavern called Bob's Hall. In 1788, Astley Sr. advertises, to take place at the Royal Grove and Astley's Amphitheatre, Westminster Bridge, a double display of fireworks. Numerous devices prepared in the usual way from powder, etc., which will be alternatively played off with the new invented philosophical fireworks, under the direction of Monsieur Henri, the inventor and professor of natural philosophy from Paris. The same year he announces a display on the Thames immediately after Astley's exhibition in honor of His Majesty's birthday, and concludes by saying, "The fireworks are made under the direction of Mr. Astley by Messrs. Cobonel and Son, who will let them off on the Thames this evening at different signals from Mr. Astley Sr., who will be mounted on the Gibraltar charger, placed in a barge in the front of the line of the fireworks." The philosophical fireworks above mentioned were evidently an imitation of those exhibited at the Lyceum by Diller, which he describes as philosophical fireworks from inflammable air, without smell, smoke, or detonation. These appear to have been nothing more than gas jets arranged in patterns and designs, some revolving and some stationary. Air was forced from a bladder through a sponge saturated with ether. Movement and variation were produced by turning on and off the gas from separate sets of holes. Two colors only appear to have been produced, rose and green. These were by the addition of strontia and baryta, or copper. A handbell is in existence advertising a similar display at Hull in 1804 by W. Clark. During the early part of the 19th century, several gardens round London made a feature of pyrotechnic displays. The Mermaid Gardens, Hackney, in the Morning Chronicle of June 1st, 1812, announces the greatest feast for the eye ever exhibited is a superb firework by that unparalleled artist, Mr. Brock, engineer. The Yorkshire Stingo and Bayswater Tea Gardens in the West gave displays up to the early 40s. White Conduit House in the Islington district had firework displays from 1824 up to shortly before the closing of these gardens in 1849. Rocherville Gardens opened in 1837, the North Woolwich Gardens, the Eagle, 1825 to 1882, the Globe, Mile End, and the Cremorne, 1843 to 1877, all had their firework displays. The best known, however, for this feature were the Surrey Zoological Gardens, 1831 to 1856, where Southby of Vauxhall conducted displays for several years, producing pyrotechnic and scenic displays there. In 1841, he gave a reproduction of the fireworks of St. Angelo and the illumination of St. Peter's, Rome, which proved a great attraction to the gardens. In the provinces, the Bellevue Gardens, Manchester, and the Clifton Zoological Gardens, Bristol, have made a feature of firework displays in their list of attractions, those at the latter being carried out in 1835 by Gingell. The famous Cremorne Gardens made a feature of pyrotechnic displays and spectacles of the scenic type with more or less regularity from their opening in 1846 down to the final closing owing to public petition in 1877. The earlier displays were carried out by Mortram and Duffel. Firework displays of a somewhat more ambitious nature have been given from time to time at the Alexandra Palace, no doubt in emulation of the historic Crystal Palace displays, which are dealt with in the ensuing chapter. And with the end of the chapter and that tease of what's to come, I think we'll end this evening's reading from Pyrotechnics, The History and Art of Firework Making, which certainly listed some surprisingly massive firework displays. I can't even imagine what people thought about that at the time. They would certainly be awe-inspiring even today. I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to read this work for yourself and see illustrations of the engravings being described, as always, you'll find a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, you can drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.